At first glance, this security camera footage doesn't seem to show anything too unusual. A man on a rooftop. Maybe he was a thief, or someone keeping watch. Moments later, another nearby camera captured a very similar figure, though now disguised as a woman. What was he hiding, or what was he looking for while trying to go unnoticed? Just a few days later, a young woman left her house like any other day, unaware that someone had been watching her every move for some time. Over the days, these images would become the key clue to solving this crime that shocked Morelos, revealing the story of an obsession that lasted for years and ended in the worst possible way. We invite you to watch the following case to the end so you don't miss any details. The case of Andrea Moran Mañon. Every day we live alongside evil. We witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is a constant presence in our society. In Criminal Investigators, we will delve into that dark side of humanity. We will bring the most perverse crimes to the screen and try to enter the minds of those beings who commit the most terrible acts. I'm Guillermo, and today I bring you another case. But before we begin, I want you to tell me where you're watching us from. We really like to know how far these stories reach. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share this video if you think someone else might be interested. And now, let's begin. Born around 1991 in the Mexican state of Morelos, Andrea Moran Mañon grew up in a normal family, along with her parents and her sister, Tania. During elementary and middle school, Andrea always stood out as a dedicated, curious, and responsible student, with a great interest in learning. And although she was social and had many friends, those who knew her at that stage remember that she also had a strong character. After finishing school, she decided to follow what was already starting to shape up as her true calling: studying nutrition at university. By then, those around her described her as a sweet, affectionate, and very hardworking person. From the beginning of her studies, she showed commitment to her training, and little by little, she discovered something that would end up defining her professional path. She liked to teach, guide, and educate those who wanted to improve their habits and well-being through nutrition. Over time, that combination of a calling to serve and a love for teaching would become a central part of her professional identity. Meanwhile, on a more personal level, she continued to live in the family home. Sometime later, just when she was taking the most important courses of her degree, Andrea met Cesar David Ramos. No one could have known at the time, but that meeting would mark a turning point in this girl's life. Cesar and Andrea shared several classes, and as often happens in college, they also had to work together on various projects. That meant they spent a lot of time in the same group, studying, organizing tasks, and sharing long hours. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They were simply two classmates who happened to be in the same major and the same academic spaces. But soon, that closeness forced by the university would start to take a very different direction than Andrea could have imagined. In hindsight, the Moran family came to say that Cesar became obsessed with her from the moment he saw her. He constantly insisted on going out together, inviting her on dates, and asking her to be his girlfriend. She, for her part, kept telling those close to her that she wasn't interested in him. But by pursuing her for nearly a year, Cesar finally got Andrea to decide to give him a chance. Once they started dating, things seemed to go well. However, it didn't take long for Cesar to start showing his true colors. He became very possessive, jealous, and controlling with Andrea. The young man also had an explosive and violent temper. And although it was never entirely clear if he was directly violent with her, there were those in their circle who claimed that Cesar did indeed show aggressive behavior and fits of rage. The situation reached a point where, whenever Andrea spoke with friends or classmates from university, Cesar didn't hide his jealousy. Over time, those reactions became more frequent and intense, to the point of demanding that she stop associating with them. But that didn't make much sense. Because on one hand, they were classmates, people she inevitably had to interact with due to the very dynamics of the university. And on the other hand, Andrea had male friends from before she met him. However, for Cesar, that seemed to be reason enough to get angry and react badly. After many arguments and conflicts, Andrea decided she had had enough. It was 2018, and fearing for her own safety, she chose to end the relationship. Even so, Cesar didn't stop insisting. He kept looking for her, begging her to get back with him, and promising he would change. Andrea, who was decisive and knew what she wanted, wasn't convinced. According to her close circle, she was aware that those attitudes weren't going to change. But contrary to what one might think, Cesar didn't back down. On the contrary, he began to harass her. From constantly calling her on the phone to seeking her out in person. Whether she was alone, with friends, at home, or at university. And something even more shocking. At times, he would pretend to be someone else, like a delivery person or a neighbor, to get her to answer. The situation became so uncomfortable and tense that, simply to reduce the chances of running into him, Andrea started avoiding some mutual friends. In addition, she asked her family and friends not to tell Cesar where she was under any circumstances. And if he called or showed up at the door, not to answer. All of this continued until December 2021. That is, almost 4 years of constant harassment since they ended the relationship in 2018. Meanwhile, Andrea tried to move on with her life. So, after getting an administrative job at a private school, she gradually began to focus on what she had always wanted, building her career. By early 2022, now graduated from university, Andrea was focused on her personal and professional growth. Like many people her age, she also used social media. On her profile, she occasionally shared content related to her main interest, explaining nutrition in a clear and accessible way for a wider audience.
A ver, me presento, soy Andrea Morán, estoy en Instagram desde hace 2 años como Nutria Morán, soy nutrióloga y por eso asocié la nutria con nutrición y después me di cuenta de que ya era como muy cliché, pero fue ya demasiado tarde, ya voy a una fiesta, voy a una peda y ya me dicen Nutria Morán, entonces ya me dicen así.
And although according to her close friends and herself, by then, nothing seemed to remain of the strong-willed young girl. The truth is that that same personality came through in the way she talked about food. At the school, luck was soon on her side, as she went from administrative management to the classroom, which allowed her to channel her teaching vocation. The change was substantial. In addition to working as a teacher of a subject called healthy living, where she talked to students about eating habits and well-being, Andrea began to help children who needed support to improve their relationship with food. As if that weren't enough, she also advised the school on cases of food allergies or intolerances.
Les ayudo a los que no les gusta comer, de que les hago cambios en caso de que tengan alergias, intolerancias. Y yo después me aviento a dar la clase de vida saludable. Entonces, creo que nadie se podría resumir plenamente mi vida.
In the afternoons, Andrea saw private patients. Her approach, as she explained herself, was realistic and very concrete. In that sense, to prevent people from getting frustrated chasing unrealistic goals or extreme diets, she preferred to work with achievable objectives. On weekends, on the other hand, she tried to slow down. She liked to relax, exercise, spend time with friends, and, once in a while, go out to a party. She was, in many ways, a young woman like so many others, with projects, with a career that was starting to take shape, and with a desire to enjoy life. In that context, we reach February 2022, when Andrea started dating a guy named Brian Anthony. Shortly after, some disturbing episodes began to occur that put the young woman in an uncomfortable situation again. Thus, when they had been together for barely a month, both were victims of an attempted assault in front of her house. According to court documents, that day Brian had gone to pick her up for a date. And as he opened the car door for Andrea to get in, a man approached and pushed her inside the vehicle, demanding that they hand over their wallet and phone. It's not entirely clear how it happened, but the couple managed to escape and drive away from the scene in the car. Later, Brian told authorities that, looking in the rear-view mirror, he saw the man pointing at them from his pocket with what could have been a weapon, although he never fired. He also recalled that the subject was acting strangely, disoriented, as if he were under the influence of some substance. It all happened in a matter of seconds. Even so, the episode left a feeling that was hard to ignore. More than a common robbery, the attack seemed out of place, sudden, and, above all, inexplicable. In the weeks that followed, calm never fully returned. Because, in different ways, Cesar's presence continued to manifest in Andrea's life. Phone calls, social media messages, texts to her cell phone, and even knocks on some neighbors' doors asking for her. In short, they were not isolated incidents, but a chain of small situations that kept the feeling that he, somehow, was still close by. Despite that scenario, or perhaps because, deep down, she believed that at some point he would get tired and stop bothering her, Andrea tried to move on with her life. As for her relationship with Brian, it also continued its course. Before we continue, let's take a quick pause. If you're finding this video interesting, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That helps us a lot to keep making more videos and telling these kinds of true stories. That being said, now, let's continue with the story. On April 26, 2022, around 7 in the morning, Brian picked Andrea up to take her to work. It was Tuesday, and there was no reason to think that in a matter of minutes, everything would change. When they were already in the car, the couple noticed something strange. On the corner at the end of the block, a human figure seemed to be watching them directly, standing still, motionless. Since the person was dressed entirely in black and had a face mask covering practically their entire face, it was impossible to tell if it was a man or a woman. They found the scene disturbing. Something wasn't right. That's why Brian decided to start the car and get out of there as soon as possible. But as soon as the car started moving, gunshots were heard. Brian barely had time to react, but he immediately saw that next to him, in the passenger seat, Andrea seemed badly wounded. Instinctively, he accelerated the vehicle and drove away from the scene. At that moment, he didn't know exactly what had happened inside the car, but he understood that he needed to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. Later, the investigation would reconstruct what happened. One of the shots had gone through the windshield and hit Andrea, knocking her unconscious almost immediately. Meanwhile, back at the scene, a neighbor who was nearby and saw the sequence knocked on the Moran family's door to warn the young woman's parents about the attack. Desperate, the family immediately rushed to the hospital. But unfortunately, once there, they were informed that the doctors had been unable to do anything. Andrea had arrived with no signs of life. Shortly after, as soon as the investigation got underway, the family was clear and direct with the detectives. They had to investigate Cesar. And then, they went on to narrate in detail what had happened in recent years, especially the obsession he had shown with Andrea after the breakup. In that scenario, what happened during the funeral was even more baffling. Cesar showed up at the wake, approached the family, offered his condolences, and even offered to cover part of the expenses for the religious service. Considering that to them, he was the main and only suspect in the crime, that was deeply uncomfortable. However, aware that the investigation was just beginning, and that the most important thing was not to interfere with the work of the authorities, they decided to hold back and act as naturally as possible. Meanwhile, in search of identifying any possible suspicious incident in the neighborhood that might yield clues about the case, the Morelos Attorney General's office began to collect security camera footage from areas near the scene of the events, both from the day of the crime and from previous days. And indeed, very soon they found something very strange in those recordings. In one of the videos, a person dressed in a very peculiar way was seen walking towards Andrea's house. It was someone tall and thin, dressed in a skirt over jeans. In addition, they wore white gloves, a kind of hat, a kind of green bag in their hands, and, as if that weren't enough, a wig. On the other hand, their movements were casual, and at one point they pulled a cell phone out of one of their pockets. The recording also showed how this person walked down the street until stopping in front of the Moran family's house. Then they knocked on the door, as if waiting for someone to open it, but there was no answer. After that, the person left the scene. Apart from the striking peculiarities of the character, the most significant thing for the investigators was the undeniable fact that their physical characteristics seemed to match Cesar's. And if there were any doubts about who could be behind all of that, another security camera record would end up reinforcing the suspicions. In that second video, recorded on Friday, April 22nd, that is, 4 days before the events, Cesar was clearly seen climbing onto the roof of an abandoned neighboring house. From there, one could see directly into the Moran family's home. And precisely, that seemed to be what Cesar was doing during the sequence, observing what was happening at the place. When Andrea arrived, who she was with, when she left, and what was happening inside. With the sum of those elements, later on, the Attorney General's office managed to obtain Cesar's phone to investigate it. On the device, they found audios and recordings where he modified his voice to pose as neighbors, delivery people, or people from the area. All in order to get Andrea to talk to him. However, as the investigation was able to reveal, she never responded to those messages or calls. As they dug deeper into the investigation, detectives also discovered that after the breakup, he had tried to meet with her several times. Even in December 2021, he tried to contact her again, although without achieving his goal. There was also another alarming event recorded during that time. Someone broke into the Moran family's house. And although it was never proven who was responsible, with all this background for the investigators, suspicions pointed back to Cesar. Regarding his cell phone, the authorities also found something important. On the morning of the attack, Cesar made a call to a number that was not registered on the device. 10 minutes after the crime, he received another call from that same number. By tracing the number in question, investigators concluded that it was linked to the person who had carried out the attack that morning. However, the identity of that individual could never be fully established. On the other hand, what the investigation did manage to determine was that Cesar had been behind the planning. As a result, on July 27, 2022, 3 months after the crime, the Morelos Attorney General's office issued an arrest warrant for Cesar, identified as the intellectual author of Andrea's femicide. Likewise, the authorities concluded that he had planned the crime months in advance. After his capture, he remained in pretrial detention. However, it wasn't until the following year that the case finally seemed to approach its resolution. During a hearing held in the Morelos Judicial Court in July of that 2023, the prosecution presented all the evidence in the case. According to the judge, the evidence was strong enough to prove Cesar's involvement in the events. Thus, the following month, Cesar David Ramos was sentenced to 40 years in prison for taking the life of Andrea Moran Magnon. After the ruling, the young woman's family spoke to various media outlets. Thus, according to Tanya, although the sentence represented an important step towards justice, there was still much to be done. In that sense, recalling that in Mexico there continued to be, Unfortunately, many cases like her sister's, she called for those crimes to receive firm punishments. All this without forgetting that the fight against violence against women was still far from over. Finally, she announced that the family would remain attentive to the next stages of the judicial process. And indeed, the case was not closed, as Cesar's defense initiated legal appeals to try to reduce the sentence. Over the months, that possibility generated concern among family members and activists, so they asked the authorities to maintain the sentence and to analyze the case with a gender perspective. For them, there was no doubt that Cesar represented a danger to other women. Hence, in their view, the benefit would only send the wrong message in a country where violence remained a serious problem. Time seemed to prove them right, and then some. Because even while in prison, it became known that Cesar continued to harass other women on social media. As Tanya explained to various media outlets, she herself had received messages and reports from these women sharing their experiences in this regard. As a result, the Moran family increased the pressure for the justice system to impose an even more severe sentence on him. It should be added that, so far, the person who carried out the attack against Andrea has not been publicly identified, so they have continued to wait for the day when they can also be identified and brought to justice. Ultimately, this case shows how far an obsession can go when someone refuses to accept a boundary. Meanwhile, to this day, in addition to continuing to seek justice, the Moran family hopes that Andrea's story will help make visible the violence that many women face when someone refuses to take no for an answer. Now that you know all the details of this shocking case, do you think justice was finally served? Or on the contrary, do you feel that there are still important questions left unanswered? Leave us your opinion in the comments. And well, dear audience, that's it for another investigation. What do you think of today's case? We would love to read your comments, as your opinion on the cases is very important to us. Remember to always do so with the utmost respect, both for the victim and for the other viewers and us who will be reading them. Before you go, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to share this video either if you think someone you know might be interested. See you in another criminal investigation. Goodbye.